Hi, good morning, friends. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Okay, I hope all of you are very safe and healthy. Okay, this is in continuation to my AWS video series, Introduction to Major AWS Services. Okay, so today we will discuss one another important AWS service, that is Amazon API Gateway. Okay, so Amazon API Gateway is another very important AWS web service. Okay, that also plays a very significant role in API development and architecture. Okay, it is basically related to the API project and the API development. Okay, so let us understand this. What is the role and responsibility of API gateways? Okay, so with definition, the API gateway, which makes it easier to publish, maintain, monitor, and secure APIs at any scale. Okay, APIs act as a server between client application and the backend services. If clients make any API request, they will all go through this particular API. API are responsible for routing the request from the client side to the appropriate services, as well as performing other tasks such as authentication, authorization, and traffic management. Following are some important features that make it more powerful. Okay, so we'll walk through the features also. But let us understand first how does it API gateway plays. Okay, so if we are developing any API project or the API service, okay, in even we develop any project in .NET Core or in any language, okay, there must be an API layer, right? Okay, so there's different layers are there. The front end layer, the API layer, then the backend database is there, database layer. Okay, so from the front end and the back end, there's an API layer that works in between. So API project, we deploy different API projects as the microservices. Okay, like if you consider any shopping portal, okay, there may be different web services. There microservices you can find different, like payment service, okay, product service, inventory, product and inventory services, sales service, okay, shipping and logistics service, notification service. Okay, so multiple kind of microservices API projects will be there in any shopping application. Okay, so we what we do, we develop the API project, API endpoints, and we deploy those endpoints on different domain or different endpoints. We publish that. Okay, and those API projects are connected to our front-end application, and front-end applications, from their different segment, user segment, those microservices are being called. Okay, so that is the traditional way of integrating API to the front end. Okay, but let us consider, you might have seen there are many bigger companies or bigger organizations who develop APIs for their product and they sell their APIs. Okay, like you might have seen the Indian Railway. Okay, Indian Railway, they are having the central server. Okay, but you can see that there are different third-party companies also in the market. They allow us booking trains. Okay, from their app. Okay, like Make My Trip. You can go on the portal of Make My Trip and you can book your train ticket itself. On the Paytm also you can book the train tickets. Okay, and there are some other Confirm Ticket is also another app. Okay, so there are various different app with different third-party companies. They also provide the train booking services. Okay, but there is a question, like they are the third-party companies. Okay, and they ultimately they are booking we are booking the tickets on their app, but ultimately the request is going to the central server of IRCTC. Okay, Indian Railway. Okay, so there must be some kind of interface, some kind of API that was hosted and deployed on the central server of IRCTC, Indian Railway, and those API is being called from those vendors itself, right? Third-party vendors. Okay, so those third-party vendors must have must have purchased or subscribed that central API from the Indian Railway, right? Right. They must be authorized to use those APIs. Okay, from the Indian Railway itself. Okay, all those third party companies like Paytm or Confirm Ticket or Make My Trip, Go Abibo, all those third-party vendors who are providing this train booking train ticket service, they might have purchased or bought the subscription to call those APIs. Okay, from the Indian Railway. Okay, so there are multiple various this kind of vendors in the market. Okay, in the industry. Okay, and all those vendors are calling that central API from the Indian Railway. Okay, so on Indian Railway server, there may be a very large and very huge load on the server itself from the users who are booking tickets on all this third-party app itself. Okay, how Indian Railway or IRCTC will make sure or will maintain the load, or will manage the traffic, will authorize the request, like which request is coming from which vendor. Okay, and if there is so many requests concurrently parallelly running. Okay, how they will do the load balance. Okay, how they will manage the authentication and authorization. Okay, like if in the background, if Indian Railway is maintaining different services, different servers. Okay, in order to make the load balancing, how the routing will happen, like which requests from a particular vendor or different vendors should be routed to different servers. Okay, on the RCT side. So API gateway is a middleware you can consider. That is what IRCT might have done. They have published and deployed their API service, API project on a particular server, and before the server, before their API endpoint, they connect their API endpoint to Amazon API gateway or any other API management service. Okay, if we talk about, if it might have Microsoft Azure, then there is API management service there in Microsoft Azure. But in AWS, it is called API gateway. So what API gateway does? API gateway stands before the API endpoint or the API project. Okay, so API or the core API which is serving the request. Okay, is behind API gateway. Okay, and API gateway stands in front of API, the main API. Okay, and all the requests from all the vendors, all the client applications are hitting the API gateway endpoint itself. Okay, so API gateway provides a API gateway provides its own URL. Okay, you can customize the URL. Okay, instead of revealing the actual URL of the server, you can create multiple copies of the APIs for different vendors. Okay, you can create multiple replica of the APIs. Okay, for different vendors, and you can implement the API gateways is all responsible for doing all the kind of authentication and authorization, like which vendors request is coming from which vendors. Okay, which applications. Okay, and what is the limit. You can also limit the particular vendor, like if let's consider, like at the time of buying the API, there is an agreement between Paytm and the IRCTC, like IRCTC allows only 1 lakh API call request call booking 1 lakh call of ticket booking API in a day to Paytm. Okay, so in a day, if request exceeds from more than 1 lakh from Paytm app to IRCTC service, then those requests will be denied from the IRCTC. Okay, so this kinds of rate limiting can also be done with the help of Amazon API gateway. Also, you can there is single API project itself that is deployed on the server, but with the help of API gateway, you are providing you can provide the different endpoints to different vendors, okay, and different keys also for different vendors, okay. So for with that API keys, there will be all the authentication and authorization will be managed by API gateway itself with the help of API gateway will all responsible for all doing all kind of authorization and authentication for all those vendors requests, okay. So that is the core concept of API gateway. API gateway plays in between of main API endpoint and the client services, client request. Okay. So what is the responsibility of API gateway? API gateway plays the traffic management. Okay. Traffic management means, let's say, as we given the example of IRCTC API service, there is a huge request of API gateway. The API request. Then API gateway is responsible to manage the load balancing also. Okay, if there are multiple servers, auto scaling automatically happens in the behind, and API gateway is responsible for routing the traffic to different server. Okay, parallelly in order to manage traffic. Core support that you can also configure the origins, cross origins, which all the actually the API gateways you can configure like which all endpoints, source endpoints is allowed to make the call. Authorization, authentication, and access control. It has all the control like console, like where you can specify like for which vendor what will be the key. Okay, and what are their authorization rules are there, authentication rules. You can specify different kind of vendors. Okay, I have given you example of IRCTC itself, but there will be multiple like the stock market, like NSE, BSE. They are also providing the different stock trading services to different vendors, and all other vendors in the market. They can develop their own application. Okay, for stock trading, and they have subscribed and they have purchased the stock trading API from the NSE, BSE, and they can also do the business. Okay, and NSE, BSE stock trading for that stock trading, they can also make the use of API Amazon gateway. Okay, for all this kind of purpose like load balancing, traffic management, core support, authorization, authentication of the vendors itself. Okay, throttling like the API process of limit like this is the point throttling that we were talking about. Like if a vendor is allowed to make 100 calls in a day, okay, for the API, now after 100 calls, all the requests will be throttled itself. Okay, though all those requests will be denied automatically. Okay, so that is the throttling process. API health monitoring also. Okay, API gateway also continuously monitors the health of the background resources itself, whether the API is working fine or not. If there is any issues in the background resources where API has been deployed. You can maintain the different versioning of the API also, like in the version 1 of the API, there are certain features. Then you can release the version 2 of the API with extended features. Okay, and you can set up different endpoint for version 2, and you can do the testing itself, right? Like you have 100 customers. Okay, but you can configure this way, like you have provided the new version of the API to only certain 10 customers, so that you can do the complete testing of that. Then you can roll out the to the actual production in the full flow. Okay, so all the versioning maintenance also you can do. Load balancing also can be handled by the API gateway itself. Okay, like in the case of IRCTC, like currently the IRCTC 10 different vendors are connected to the IRCTC servers, and they are consuming the API. In case later on the number of vendors increases, okay, IRCTC provisions the more infrastructure in the background in order to serve all the clients. Okay, so what API gateway does? API gateway also with the help of ALB auto scaling, load balancer. Gateway also, API gateway can handle and manage the traffic itself, do the load balancing. For repetitive data, the same data which is being required for the endpoints, client applications. Okay, so in order to make the call to the actual server, the API gateway can also cache those static data. Okay, those repetitive data, and on subsequent call from the client, it can be served from the cache itself instead hitting the actual server. So that is also one of the caching feature of the API gateway. Static response handling. Okay, that is also a feature of API gateway. Protocol translation and composition. It's all protocol translation means different kind of, if you response format is required by different vendors like JSON, XML. Okay, all those things can be handled by the API gateway itself. And the composition. Okay, composition is a feature of request model to response model binding that we will see later in the practical session in the API gateway itself. So we have understood the roles of API gateway, right? It is an external layer to the actual API endpoint. Okay, and that is all responsible for make the API distributable, scalable, okay, and manageable itself. That is the purpose of API gateway, basically. And for a dedicated product like, as I've given the example of IRCTC stock trading, okay, where API is a USP and a key selling product. Okay, they sell the API itself to the different vendors, right? Okay, and different vendors can purchase the API subscription. Okay, we can see the example. We can also take another example of the Google services like Google Map. Okay, and there are different kind of Google services itself where we can create our account and we get the API keys. Okay, and there also Google has different rate limiting also, like in standard and free tier there are some certain limits. Okay, when will increase the subscription, then our limits will exceed itself. Okay, so all those in this kind of scenarios, the API gateway and API management tools like APIM or API gateway plays a very significant role. So that was the overall understanding of API gateway. Okay, let us move next to the next slide. Okay, we can see it's a good picture here where we can understand the working of API gateway. Okay, so in this side, there are different kind of user applications. The user is on the PC itself, calling the mobile applications. Okay, they are hitting the API gateway. Okay, and API gateway then collecting the request from the end user, and accordingly they are routing the request to actual correct API service. Whether user is looking for the product, then API gateway will route the product to the product service, product catalog microservice. If user is asking for his profile, then it will route the request to the user profile microservice. If user is looking for some shopping stuffs, then it will route the request to the shopping service itself. Okay, and if customer is ordering something, then order collection microservice API gateway can route the request. Okay, so behind the API gateway, as per our business, there may be different kind of microservices. Okay, and all the microservices will be in the background connected to their specific database, data store. Okay, so you can see that API gateway stands between the microservices and the client applications. Okay, and what API gateway is doing? API gateway is responsible for collecting the request from the client applications, okay, and routing the request to the correct microservice, and then microservice will return the response from its store, okay, and return to the API gateway, and the API gateway again will serve the response to the user application. Okay, so This is the a pictorial representation of what is the responsibility of API gateway itself. Okay. Moving next, yeah. What kind of different kind of API protocols are supported by API gateway? So these are HTTP API. We can develop HTTP API itself with the rest of help of API gateway. Okay, so API gateway supports HTTP API where REST API also OpenID Connect for authentication authorization that also we can integrate with API gateway. WebSocket API, okay, where is a consistent connection is required. Okay, and in the real time communications, as we have seen like in the stock trading where the price every second just goes up and down, there is uh, it's a high requirement of WebSocket itself. So in that case, also API gateway plays a very significant role. REST API. Uh, if we have developed a API project that is in REST API model, okay, so that also can be integrated with API gateway and the private REST API that is within the private network of the VPC itself. Okay, so that also can be connected with the API gateway. So all these four types of API projects or API endpoints are uh, can be connected to API gateway. Okay. Here also we can stand with this image itself like API gateway can be integrated with different kind of other AWS services also. Like API gateway can be connected with Elastic Load Balancer, and further ELB load balancer can be connected to multiple ECS cluster and multiple EC2 instances for balancing the traffic load. Okay. API gateway can connected with AWS Lambda also. If we are going with this is the server based architecture, like API gateway is connected to the Elastic Load Balancer. Then Elastic Load Balancer is distributing the traffic to multiple EC2 instances or EC2 ECS clusters. Okay. If we're going on serverless architecture, then we can connect our API gateway with AWS Lambda. Okay, and AWS Lambda can process the request and return the response to API gateway, and the API gateway will then return the response to the connected web clients. Okay, or the user applications or user apps. The API gateway can also be connected to the S3 resources if there are some buckets, static files, okay, on S3 we have uploaded, and that also need to be fetched and distributed to the multiple client applications. Then it can be connected to the Amazon S3 also. And apart from these AWS services, you can, if you have developed your own API project in .NET or in any custom runtime applications, that also API and endpoint also can be connected to API gateway, and you can do all the authorization, authentication, rate limiting, throttling. Okay, all those steps which are the feature of API gateway can be used with your custom API project also. So we can see like API gateway is compatible with the AWS resources as well as your custom API projects also. Yeah, so that was it, and we can see this API gateway benefits. It's efficient and scalable. It itself is API gateway is very scalable. It also scales up, scales down depending upon the traffic. Okay, performance is it also very much performant, flexible in security. Like it has all those features. Like in the previous slide we discussed, like if multiple different vendors or third party applications are connected to your API gateway, you have the full control. Like if you want to modify the limits of particular vendor, you have to deny the request from particular vendor, you have to increase the request limit from particular vendor. Okay, all those different kind of authorization and authentication you can apply differently. Okay, on individual vendors itself. Okay, and you have the complete monitoring tool, like what all requests, how many requests are being received. Okay, whether there are all those their logs, like if the requests are being received from the particular vendors. Okay, what was happened for the request. Also all those logs also you can see in the API gateway console itself. Okay, so that was it about the API gateway, and In coming topic, we will discuss about the Route 53. That is very one of the very important feature of AWS. So that is part of coming videos. So this was all about API gateway itself. It was the uh, introduction to API gateway service. Okay. Uh, Thank you very much for now, friends. If you like this video, okay, please like and subscribe to the channel so that whenever we upload any new videos on this series, you will be automatically notified. Okay, and it also motivates us to prepare more such interesting videos for the community. Okay, thank you very much. Stay happy, stay healthy, stay connected. Thank you.